right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling MRI. Something tells me you're more than a little curious about it, based on all the stuff you sent our way.
Oh, definitely interesting stuff.
I bet you're like most folks. MRI, you think big, clunky machine, loud noises, and whatever you do, no metal.
Yeah, pretty much.
But there's this whole other side to it. What if I told you it's all thanks to tiny little spinning protons?
It's wild, isn't it, how something so fundamental to physics ends up giving us these super detailed pictures of what's going on inside us.
It's like magic, almost. And that's our mission today, uncovering that magic, figuring out how MRI uses physics to look right through us, no scalpels needed, and then all the incredible things we can do with it. You ready for this?
Absolutely. Let's unlock those secrets.
All right, so first things first, we got to start with something simple. We're basically walking, talking bags of water.
Mostly water, yeah.
And water has hydrogen, and hydrogen, this is the key hydrogen has.
Protons.
Bingo. Those tiny particles are the real stars of our show today.
Couldn't do it without them. And the whole MRI thing, it actually started way before anyone even thought of using it for medical imaging. Like, way back in the 1930s, physicists were messing around with something called nuclear magnetic resonance. NMR, for short.
NMR. I gotta admit, sounds kind of intimidating. What were they looking at exactly?
It's not as complicated as it sounds, really. Basically, they were studying how these little atomic nuclei act when they're in a magnetic field. Felix Bloch and Edward Purcell, they were the pioneers, even won a Nobel Prize in '52 for their work.
Wow, a Nobel Prize already. And this was all before they even thought about medicine.
Oh yeah, medicine wasn't even on their radar at that point.
So how do we go from these physicists fiddling with atoms to those amazing 3D images we see today?
Ah, that's where the real brilliance comes in. Scientists like Paul Lauterbur and Sir Peter Mansfield, back in the '70s, they cracked the code, figured out how to use NMR to actually create images. They found a way to take those signals from protons, mainly from the hydrogen in our bodies, and translate them into pictures of our tissues. And guess what? Another Nobel Prize in 2003 for this breakthrough.
2 Nobel Prizes. Wow, that's amazing. Seems like understanding basic physics was really the foundation for this whole medical marvel. But there's one thing that always bugged me. Why the name change? From NMR imaging to just MRI?
Ah, good question. So picture this. The Cold War is going on. Nuclear isn't exactly the most, shall we say, marketable word.
Makes sense?
Dropping nuclear and going with MRI. Pure marketing genius.
Clever move. Speaking of magnets, I know the heart of an MRI machine is this giant magnet. Just how strong are we talking here?
Strong. Thousands of times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field.
Whoa, that's some serious magnetic power. What happens to us, to our bodies, when we're in that kind of field?
Okay, imagine this. You've got iron filings scattered around a magnet. What happens?
They line up, right, along those magnetic field lines.
Exactly. It's kind of similar to what happens to the protons in your body inside the MRI machine. Normally, those protons are spinning every which way, but this powerful magnet comes along and forces them to line up, either with the field or against it.
So all these billions of tiny protons in our bodies suddenly face the same way.
That's mind-blowing.
But how do we go from lined up protons to an actual image? What's the next step?
That's where the radio waves come in. The MRI machine sends out this burst of radio frequency energy, an RF pulse, as it's called.
RF pulse, radio waves, and the stuff we listen to. Are those harmful?
Not at all. Totally different kind of radio waves here, completely safe. Think of it like this. You pluck a guitar string, it vibrates, right? And that releases sound energy. Same idea here, the RF pulse kind of plucks those protons, disrupts their alignment for a moment, makes them wobble and send out their own entropy signals.
So the RF pulse is like a tiny musician, plucking each proton to create a unique sound that the MRI machine can hear.
Haha, yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And as those protons chill out and go back to their aligned state after being plucked, the machine picks up the energy they release. And here's the crucial part. Different tissues, they release that energy at different speeds.
Ah, so that's the key to creating those detailed images. Like each tissue has its own signature tune based on how its protons behave.
Precisely. And we call these differences in how fast they release that energy, how they relax, T1 and T2 relaxation times. T1 is really good for seeing anatomical structures, like fat shows up bright on T1 weighted images so you can easily see the outlines of organs.
And T2, if I remember right, is all about fluids. Helps spot areas where there's swelling after an injury.
You got it.
Hey.
By combining T1 and T2, we get those incredibly detailed, contrasted images.
It's wild, isn't it? Spinning protons, radio waves, and boom, we can see inside the human body. But I'm ready to have my mind blown even further. I hear MRI isn't just about static images anymore, right?
You heard right. Hold on tight. We're about to step into the world of functional MRI. Get ready to see the brain in action.
All right. Functional MRI or fMRI. Lay it on me. How does seeing the brain in action actually work?
It all boils down to blood flow. When a certain part of the brain gets busy, it needs more oxygen-rich blood.
So like if I'm trying to solve one of those really tricky logic puzzles,
Yeah,
the parts of my brain that handle that, they'd be getting a rush of blood.
exactly. And fMRI lets us see these subtle changes in blood flow, and then, the cool part, we map them onto images of the brain. It's like watching different areas light up in real time as you think, do stuff, even feel emotions.
Hold on, so we're not just seeing the physical structure anymore, we're seeing the brain actually respond to things. That's wild. What kind of stuff are researchers using this for to understand the brain better?
Oh, all sorts of amazing things. fMRI has totally changed how we think about language processing in the brain. The changes that happen after someone has a stroke, even how complex emotions, fear, joy, you name it, how those work on a neural level. There was even this study, they used fMRI to see what happens in the brain when people are making moral judgments, like which areas are involved in deciding what's right and wrong.
Whoa, that's heavy stuff. Getting into the realm of thoughts and feelings, not just anatomy. I'm curious, though, we talked about T1 and T2 relaxation times with regular MRI. Does fMRI use those too?
It's a bit different, but the idea of messing with those proton signals and then seeing what happens, that's still the core of it.
Oh,
fMRI focuses on this property of blood called its magnetic susceptibility, basically how it reacts to a magnetic field, and that changes depending on how much oxygen is in the blood.
okay, I think I'm following you. You also mentioned this other technique, DTI, diffusion tensor imaging. Where does that fit into this brain imaging puzzle?
If fMRI is like looking at a city at night, seeing the lights flicker on and off as different areas get busy, DTI is like mapping out all the roads and highways connecting those lights.
So it's showing us how different parts of the brain talk to each other.
Exactly. Imagine the brain as a giant network of highways, info zooming back and forth between different regions. DTI lets us see those pathways, those white matter tracks that connect everything.
All right, starting to get the big picture. Why is mapping those brain highways so important? What can it tell us?
Well, think about it. Knowing how those connections are laid out helps us understand how information flows in the brain, how different areas team up to do different tasks. For instance, they're using DTI to look at concussions in athletes, see how those white matter tracks get disrupted, could lead to better diagnoses and treatment.
So we're talking potentially changing how we handle brain injuries. That's huge.
Definitely huge. DTI is also shedding light on learning disabilities and how those brain connections change as we age.
It's incredible. Watching brain activity, mapping its connections, we've come a long way from just looking at static images. But gotta ask, how does MRI stack up against other imaging techniques? X-rays, CT scans, ultrasounds. Are there times when one would be better than the others?
Great question. Each one has its strengths and weaknesses. It really depends what you're trying to see, what you're trying to diagnose. X-rays are awesome for bones, seeing fractures, but for soft tissues like organs, muscles, not so much.
Right, in CT scans, they give you a decent look at both bone and soft tissue, but you've got that radiation exposure, something you want to minimize whenever you can.
For sure. Ultrasound's safe, great for looking at soft tissues, especially during pregnancy, but it can't penetrate bone that well, and the level of detail isn't the same as MRI.
So it sounds like MRI really shines when you need to see soft tissues, but you want to avoid radiation. What makes it such a powerful tool?
The detail you get with MRI is amazing. You can see tiny differences in tissue, spot really small abnormalities. That's a big deal for diagnosing all kinds of conditions, from tumors to ligament tears to lesions in the brain.
There must be downsides though, right? Isn't it super expensive and the scans take forever?
Yeah, cost can be a factor, and they can take a while, sometimes up to an hour, and that enclosed space. Not exactly fun if you're claustrophobic.
Oh, I can relate to that. I had an MRI once. Those banging sounds were kind of freaky.
Yeah.
And being stuck in that tube didn't help. But the techs were great. They explained everything, made me feel as comfortable as possible.
That's good to hear. Making sure the patient's okay in there is super important. The good news is there's been a lot of progress on that front. Open MRI machines are a lot less confining, and they're always working on ways to make them quieter.
Glad to hear that. So even with the downsides, the benefits are pretty undeniable. We've seen how MRI has changed medical diagnostics, opened up this whole new way of understanding the human body, especially the brain.
You nailed it. The impact's been huge, especially in oncology and neurology. Catching things early, treating them more effectively.
It really is amazing thinking back to where we started, just tiny little protons, and now we're mapping out the brain's intricate highways.
It's incredible what we can do when physics and medicine team up like this.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears for a minute and talk about real-world impact. We know MRI is super important for detecting tumors.
Mm.
What are some other ways it's helping to, save lives and improve people's health?
Oh, tons of ways. Diagnosing and monitoring all sorts of conditions. In orthopedics, for example, it's a game changer. Can see tears and ligaments and tendons, cartilage damage, the kinds of injuries athletes get.
So for those athletes, it's not just about spotting the injury, it's about guiding their treatment, getting them back in the game.
Exactly. Helps surgeons plan procedures more precisely, make sure patients are getting the right care. And in neurology, oh man, MRI has been a total revolution.
Yeah, I can imagine. Being able to see the brain in that much detail must be huge for neurologists.
It's completely changed how they do things. Brain tumors, aneurysms, those lesions you see with multiple sclerosis, even subtle changes from Alzheimer's disease, we can see them so much earlier now.
And early detection, that's key, right?
Yeah.
Especially for those conditions.
You said it. The earlier you catch it, the better chance you have to intervene and make a real difference for the patient.
It really makes you appreciate just how powerful this technology is. Seeing inside the brain like that with such clarity.
Powerful stuff, no doubt. And the future of MRI. It's wide open, so many possibilities. Researchers are pushing the boundaries all the time, coming up with new techniques, new applications. It's going to keep transforming medicine.
So about that future, what's on the horizon? I've heard some buzz about something called ultrafast MRI. What's that all about?
Ultrafast is all about, well, speeds. Regular MRI scans can take a while, as we talked about. Not ideal if you have trouble staying still in that tube. Ultrafast techniques, the goal is to cut that scan time way down.
That would be amazing. Especially for folks who, get claustrophobic or find it tough to lie still for that long.
For sure. Faster scans would mean a more comfortable experience for patients. Plus, it opens up all sorts of doors for capturing these dynamic processes. Imagine seeing a beating heart in super high def in real time.
Whoa, that's next level stuff. Anything else researchers are excited about in the MRI world?
Oh yeah, there's this thing called hyperpolarized MRI. It's pretty wild. You basically boost the signals from certain molecules, allows us to actually see metabolic processes happening.
Hold on, you're saying we could watch molecules at work inside the body? Think what that could mean for diagnosing and treating diseases, especially something like cancer.
Huge implications. Imagine seeing a tumor's metabolism in action, how it's growing, how it's reacting to treatment.
The level of detail we're talking about is just mind-blowing. From those spinning protons to actually watching the inner workings of cells. What a journey.
It's quite a story, right? This whole deep dive, we went from basic physics to groundbreaking applications, and it all comes back to those tiny little protons spinning away inside each of us.
We've covered so much ground today, it's almost hard to wrap my head around it. From those protons and those super strong magnets to seeing the body's anatomy and even mapping out the brain's connections. But I'm wondering, for our listener out there, what does it all really mean? Why should they care about the world of MRI?
Because it's more than just pictures. It's about understanding our bodies at a deeper level, catching diseases earlier, treating them more effectively, going after the root causes of illness. MRI has the power to transform lives. That's the big takeaway.
It's easy to forget sometimes that science isn't just happening in labs and research papers. It's out there in the real world, making a real difference for people's health and well-being.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And the things we've talked about today, all these advancements, it's clear that MRI is going to keep changing lives for the better for a long time to come.
Absolutely. Well, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of MRI. I'll leave you with this, dear listener. We've seen how fMRI lets us watch the brain in action, different areas lighting up as we think, feel, and experience the world around us. But what does that mean for how we understand consciousness? Could MRI one day unlock the mysteries of the human mind? What does it really mean to be conscious, to be aware? It's a big question, a question that researchers are grappling with right now.
It is a big question. And who knows, maybe you, dear listener, will be the one to make the next breakthrough in this fascinating field.
So stay curious, keep those questions coming, and keep exploring. That's all for our deep dive into the world of MRI. Until next time.